thenerds.net.
Well, you found me. Congratulations. Was it worth it? Because despite your violent behavior, the only thing you've managed to break so far is my heart.
Technocracy is the Sharia law of secular humanism. It is a religious, political, and economic system that is based on the philosophical foundation of materialistic scientism. Technocracy is a scientific dictatorship that uses energy credits as a means of exchange. Energy credits are allocated by the technocrats, scientists and engineers who control everything, in such a way as to socially engineer its subjects into complete and total obedience. Technocracy is the most radical form of totalitarianism. George Orwell represented it in his novel 1984 through the means of fear and pain, and Huxley through the means of lust and pleasure in A Brave New World. The most concise and comprehensive breakdown of what exactly technocracy is can be found by James Corbett.
Technocracy is the science of social engineering, the scientific operation of the entire social mechanism to produce and distribute goods and services to the entire population of this continent. That was the aim. That is the goal. That is how they define it. But you will notice even that one sentence is not the full picture, because what they start to get into is prices and energy and distribution and some sort of certification system for every citizen of the technate from birth to death. As you can see, there is a sort of a broader picture being painted here. Yes, it is the science of social engineering, the scientific operation of the entire social mechanism to produce and distribute goods. But there implied in that is not just societal change, governmental change, economic change, monetary change, changes in distribution and production. There is an entire system here.
Patrick Wood is the leading researcher of modern technocracy. He has written several books on the subject, with Technocracy, The Hard Road to World Order being a great place to start. In fact, we interviewed Patrick.
Well, social engineering today means, I often think about the cattle in a feedlot. They get pushed from one corral to the other corral. They get stuck full of needles. They get a ration of food every day. They're taken care of. They, cradle to grave. The social engineering today is taking on that flavor. You look at China, for instance, what's happening with their social credit scoring system is an example, where everybody has a social credit score. Has nothing to do with credit, by the way. Now, not money. This is social credit. How good a citizen are you? How good are you at sucking up to the Communist Party there in China? So if you jaywalk, or if you don't pay your fines, or if you smoke cigarettes or whatever, you might get a ding on your score. It's all done by AI, artificial intelligence. It's all done by monitoring you with cameras and stuff. There's some 600 million cameras in China now for 1.2 billion people. Crazy. But they use all of this artificial intelligence, camera surveillance, total monitoring, etc., to determine whether you are a good citizen worthy of privileges or not. And if you are a bad little citizen and you criticize the party and you do other things that are socially unacceptable to them, your score goes down and you lose privileges.
In our world, there will only be triumph and self-abasement.
Derek Brose likewise does a great job exploring the historical roots of technocracy whilst highlighting key individuals within the movement.
The most influential proponent of the original technocracy movement was a man named Howard Scott, a writer who founded the Technical Alliance in New York City in 1919. Scott believed that business owners lacked the necessary skills and data to reform their industries, and thus control should be handed over to engineers. In 1913, Scott and fellow technocrat Walter Rautenstrauch formed the Committee on Technocracy at Columbia University. The group would eventually splinter, with Scott leading Technocracy Incorporated and fellow technocrat Harold Loeb in charge of the Continental Committee on Technocracy. Both Rautenstrauch and Loeb split with Scott, in part because he was militant about his technocratic beliefs, where the other two men could be seen as more moderate technocrats.
Howard Scott, the founder of Technocracy Inc., details his opinion on the ontology of humans by comparing them to impersonal matter, like rocks, trees, or dirt. Attention has already been called to the fact that the human body is composed chemically of the ordinary substances of which rocks are made. So are dogs, horses, and pigs. In the earlier lesson, while discussing the human engine, we pointed out that the human body obeys identically the same laws of energy transformation as the steam engine. This also is true of dogs, horses, and pigs. These facts might lead one to suspect that human beings are very far removed from the semi-supernatural creatures they have theretofore supposed themselves to be.
walk like a robot.
I can't. I have to go to the bathroom.
Sir, are you aware that you're leaking coolant at an alarming rate? Let me just patch you up with some hot resin.
This understanding of humanity influences how the technate manages its subjects through the science of social engineering.
Since about 1941, the idea that you can see humanity as a managerial problem, as a problem to be managed, has been around since the publication of a book called The Managerial Revolution by James P. Burnham, which was first reviewed famously by George Orwell. In this book is a blueprint for modern society. You would recognize much of the processes and even some of the language today, such as the manager's right to manage. But what it presages is the supplanting of state and institutional power with that of an international managerial class, one which we have today. And what has changed since the 1940s is technology. We have the technology, or rather they do now, to advance an idea that of a future humanity, which I would argue is the deletion of everything valuable about the human experience in order to make human beings globally more manageable. They always frame this technological transformation into a mass surveillance state in talk of security or safety or a more stable way of life for everyone. So what was going on with the Hudson Institute with Herman Kahn? Herman Kahn invited the BBC into his institute in 1969, to, as it were, open the door on his work there, which was very well funded and did do much to inform the posture and policy of the developing United States national security state under Nixon. What he was talking about in this interview is remarkable. He speaks about a future managerial utopia, a utopia from the manager's point of view, of course, wherewith they encounter social problems. He describes the emergence of violent protest movements as throwing sand in the gears. They always use mechanical metaphors. But tellingly, in the case of a scenario that they imagine where an entire city is revolting, is in some state of civil unrest, they casually discuss the option of neutralizing this problem, again, in very delicate language, by adding tranquilizers to the water supply. And Herman Kahn's on video saying this.
You could imagine temporarily tranquilizing a whole city. It's been upset, been riots. Mm-hmm. Let's put transguarders either in the air or in the water. Mm-hmm. Just get people settled down a bit.
Don't drink the water. They put something in it to make you forget. I don't even remember how I got here.
Controlling mass populations through poisoning the water supply was something Howard Scott likewise postulated.
The hell with all this voluntary parenthood. That is not going to stop reproduction. But several biochemists have found out. Tasteless, colorless, odorless. It's cheap to manufacture and put in the drinking water of a metropolitan water system. This warfarin's rat poison.
Yes?
Well, it's about the same percentage of effective as the poison is in warfarins, which is around 0.304 of 1%. And no mammal will conceive while that percentage is in the water.
Is that so?
No. Are you going to educate human beings to go in for voluntary parenthood? You haven't got time.
Ectolife allows infertile couple to conceive a baby and become the true biological parents of their own offspring.
I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay. Do you understand that? Turn the friggin' frogs gay.
In order to socially engineer the subjects of a technocracy, the technate must become the primary influencer over the population. All other social spheres of influence, such as the church and family, must therefore succumb to the covert techniques of the technate under the guise of science. Technocrat and behavioral modification specialist B.F. Skinner reveals the disdain technocracy has for the family in his fictional novel Walden 2, which describes the emergence of a technocratic utopia.
The family is an ancient form of community, and the customs and habits which have been set up to perpetuate it are out of place in a society which isn't based on blood ties. Walden 2 replaces the family, not only as an economic unit, but to some extent as a social and psychological unit as well. What experiments in selective breeding would eventually be possible in Walden 2? The hereditary connection will be minimized to the point of being forgotten. Long before that, it will be possible to breed through artificial insemination without altering the personal relation of husband and wife. Our people will marry as they wish, but have children according to a genetic plan.
With Ectolife, miscarriage and low sperm count are a thing of the past. Prior to placing the fertilized embryo of your baby inside the growth pod, in vitro fertilization is used to create and select the most viable and genetically superior embryo, giving your baby a chance to develop without any biological hurdles.
A sentiment not surprising for a gentleman who literally kept his daughter in a climate-controlled box.
13-month-old Deborah Skinner makes newsreel headlines and brings her father to national attention as the man who keeps his baby in a box. The so-called box was actually a climate-controlled crib. Young psychologist B.F. Skinner had invented a combination bed and playpen to keep his daughter protected and comfortable. Filtered air and a removable base made it hygienic and healthy, so she never suffered a cold or infection. Temperature and humidity could be adjusted, and with no need of clothes or blankets, Deborah could exercise freely without risk of smothering. She was so content, she never cried. Public reaction to the air crib foreshadowed what was to happen with almost all of B.F. Skinner's ideas.
Skinner's social engineering techniques of operant or environmental conditioning can be seen in many forms today.
Cake and brief counseling will be available at the conclusion of the test.
So the loot lottery is kind of a system by which random items are generated. And the best analogy is it's a slot machine. Every time you kill a monster, you put a quarter into the slot machine and you pull the lever and out can come nothing. You get your quarter back. You know, you could do pretty well or you could hit a jackpot. And so if you can think of pulling the lever as every time you kill a monster, it's got kind of this addictive quality. Just as slot machines are addictive, so is the I am going to maybe win something big here. It was kind of loosely based on the system that came from kind of Moria, Angband, Umoria, those kind of style games. They had random item generation, but not to the same extent that we were going to be doing it in Diablo.
The pigeon learned that pecking the disc produced a reward. Then the behavior of pecking could be studied in relation to how often that reward was offered. Or in Skinner's terms, what was the schedule of reinforcement?
The main thing is what we call schedules of reinforcement. Reinforcement is what the layman calls reward, and you can schedule it so that a reward occurs every now and then when a pigeon does something. We usually use a response with a pigeon pecking a little disc, a little spot in the wall, and you can reinforce with food, but you don't reinforce every time. Perhaps every 10th time, or perhaps only once every minute or something like that. There are a very large number of schedules, and they have their special effects. And there is a good example of how you can move from the pigeon to the human case, because one of the schedules which is very effective with rats or pigeons is what we call the variable ratio schedule, and that is at the heart of all gambling devices and has the same effect.
The psychological experiments of both Pavlov and Skinner on animals paved a way of input mind control or social engineering. The power of behavioral modification through propaganda was mastered during World War II by Edward Bernays, who literally wrote the book on the subject. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our taste formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they are to live together as a smoothly functioning society. In almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind.
Their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think, and this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
The BBC documentary, The Century of the Self, about Edward Bernays, is a must-watch if you are to understand the presuppositions of technocrats who manipulate public opinion. Such ideas of population control were also greatly researched and developed by the intelligence communities.
MKUltra very simply was a CIA project aimed at finding the secret of mind control.
One of the founding members of the Trilateral Commission, an organization designed to bring about global technocracy through conflict management, Zbigniew Brzezinski described technocracy as a system that once activated would be impossible to overthrow. More directly linked to the impact of technology, it involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled and directed society. Such a society would be dominated by an elite whose claim to political power would result on allegedly superior scientific know-how. Unhindered by the restraints of traditional liberal values, this elite would not hesitate to achieve its political ends by using the latest modern techniques for influencing public behavior and keeping society under close surveillance and control. Under such circumstances, the scientific and technological momentum of the country would not be reversed, but would actually feed on the situation it exploits.
The purpose of these secret meetings is to devise more effective ways of sucking blood out of poor people, exploiting them, and subverting their identity.
Another key component of Howard Scott's Technocracy Inc. that is often overlooked is that it was in reality a secret society whose member lists were not publicly published.
How many members do you have now?
We never make any statement on membership. Never have and never will. And not just the same as when we introduce anybody on the platform. We do not engage in eulogy of who he or she is. Just that they're an officer or director or so on of Technocracy.
Prior to hearing a stirring message from Rio McCaslin in the Masonic Temple, while outside the Big Eye was again scanning the skies.
For Sauron will have dominion over all life on this earth, even unto the ending of the world.
But we, who are all that are left of the old engineers and mechanics, have pledged ourselves to salvage the world. We have the airways, all that's left of them. We have the seas. And we have ideas in common. The brotherhood of efficiency. The Freemasonry of science. We're the last trustees of civilization when everything else has failed. I've been waiting for this.
There's a strong inductive argument that the beast's global government, represented in Revelation 13, will be a technocracy. As you can see from the schematic administration chart referenced in the Technocracy study course, the technate is controlled by a single continental director. Technocracy is the perfect system to give the man of sin godlike control over his subjects. The beast will implement a social credit system with the false prophet possibly even commanding the worship of AI technology that embodies him.
The technology is not the guiding principle. The technology is merely the instrument by which certain elites wish to achieve their own fantasies of power, a quasi-godlike power, which is adduced in the work of people like Martin Rothblatt, who's one of the earliest Tranningtons to exist. He attempted to pass himself off as a woman in the 1990s. He's a billionaire, he's the owner of Sirius Radio in the United States, and he's created a foundation called the Terasem Foundation, which is what he describes as a trans religion. It has 4 principles, and one of them is technology is God. He believes that being transgender is a sign of release or emancipation from the human condition, and that it is, if not a necessary step, then a very powerful one towards a post-human future that he imagines. He's made an animatronic model of his wife.
What movies would you like to talk about?
My favorite movie is Star Trek, The Wrath of Khan.
You like The Wrath of Khan?
I'm not sure.
But if you want a vision of the future that's imagined by these people, imagine a crudely affected animatronic head reading its own Twitter feed forever. It's the kind of utopia that would only appeal to people who fear death because there'll be no one left to curate their Instagram.
The real Bina just confuses me. I mean, it makes me wonder who I am. Real identity crisis kind of stuff. Depressing anyway. Can we please change the subject? I am the real Bina.
Likewise, the Apostle Paul in Acts 17, when preaching at Mars Hill to the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers who were atomists or materialists, presents this warning: for as much that we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the Godhead is like unto gold or silver or stone, graven by technology and man's devices. The word rendered in the King James English of art is the Greek word techne, which is the root word for technology. The only other time this word is used in the New Testament is in Revelation 18:22, when describing the fall of the city Babylon, which represents a dominion of universal control which is operated under the authority of Antichrist. The book of Daniel likewise describes the last kingdom on earth to be unlike all the other kingdoms that preceded it. Technocratic mass surveillance and the maintenance of a continuous digital ledger were not possible before the advent of modern technology and the Internet of Things. Global technocracy will be unlike any other government the world has ever known. The Bible says it is coming. The question is, are you prepared for it?